Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I've got Dianne Saxe with us tonight. She's a councillor in the City of Toronto for Ward 11, University of Rosedale. She is an environmental and energy lawyer. She ran for the Green Party. She was Ontario's environmental commissioner. I had the chance of the opportunity of interviewing her when she was running for the Green Party. And she's now a councillor on the City of Toronto Council. And so I thought it'd be great to check in with her. As you know, we've interviewed a couple of other councillors at City Council in Toronto. So I thought it'd be great to check in and think and talk about how she's enjoying life as a city councillor. How's it different than being an environmental commissioner or a candidate for the Green Party, and what she hopes to accomplish. Councillor Saxe, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure, my honor. So tell me, why did you decide to run for city council after being a candidate for the provincial Greens?
I wasn't planning to be honest. I worked really, really hard running for the provincial election over a period of a year and a half, neglected my family and my work and everything else that I was doing. And when the election was over in June of 2022, I was bushed. My family was bushed, and I really promised that I would spend the summer, recovering from the campaign, thanking everyone, thanking all the donors and the volunteers and all the people who worked so hard for me, and then making up to my family. And then Mike Layton announced that he wasn't running. He had been the councillor for the previous 12 years and seemed absolutely secure in the position. And then when he vacated, suddenly the job was open. And a number of people jumped on me and said, you should run, you should run, you should run. You've just done all this work, building up your name recognition in the ward. It's a chance to have an influence in ways that matter. And in fact, a chance to have an influence much more than an opposition member can ever hope to have in a majority government at the federal or provincial levels. And I thought about it for a while and decided they were right. And that's true. There is much more opportunity to influence real life as a councillor than there ever would have been in the opposition benches in the provincial government.
That is interesting that you think and have found that being a councillor on city council has far more influence than being an opposition member in parliament or the legislature. So what are your big issues?
Well, so many. I mean, I ran because of climate and environment. We can see with the fires all across Canada, food prices, insurance prices rising, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people moving around the world because they can't live where they are. Climate chaos is here, and it's going to get worse and worse. It's going to dominate the lives of young people, and I have children and grandchildren. So that is why I ran. Now that I'm here, there's so many other issues that are interesting and important. I spent a lot of time improving local parks. We certainly learned during COVID how incredibly important outdoor green space is. And my ward, University Rosedale, more than half the people don't have private outdoor space. So the parks are incredibly important. And other than Rosedale, my ward is one of the most park deficient in the city. So it is really, really important to create new parks where we can and to take better care of the parks that we have. And I spend a lot of time on that. I certainly also spend a lot of time on anything to do with climate and environment. I work very closely with the city's climate, energy, and forestry team. I meet regularly with them and look for every opportunity I have to move the city towards our Transform TO goals, to improve our tree cover, to provide some habitat at least for the birds. I could do with less habitat for the bunnies and the squirrels, but certainly for the birds and other wild creatures, we have taken away most of their habitat, and it's really exciting when we can give some back. We have enormous opportunities in terms of housing. I have very much supported the current mayor's housing action plan to allow more housing, especially close to really good transit. And my ward has the best transit in the city. I have more subway stations than anybody else, 4 streetcar lines and buses. It's a very dense part of the city, and we have good transit, and so a transit-focused development policy, which the provincial government does have, pushes a lot of development into my ward. So making those projects as good as I can, given the many different ways that the province makes our job punishingly hard, I do. And also thinking about the real strengths of the ward in the city. So, two of the top features of my ward, one is the University of Toronto, well, the universities, because I also have a quarter of the Toronto Metropolitan University, and I'm just across the street from OCAD. But also the hospitals. Hospital Row is in my ward. And so we have an incredible center of medical excellence, medical research, medical innovation. So some of these things come together. So, for example, you remember the old coach terminal, the old gray coach terminal at Bay and Elizabeth?
For sure.
I mean, I think everybody used to get on the bus there.
I used to get on the bus there every weekend to go to London, Ontario.
Exactly, or be there to meet someone coming off the bus. It was an incredibly important part of Toronto's history and geography for a very long time. And it was, I think, really, really bad government policy, allowing their profitable routes to be undercut by private competitors that killed the bus business in Ontario. And so now most people who are depending on the bus don't have a way to get anywhere. But nevertheless, so that left us with a heritage building right downtown that lay vacant for many years. And what I just approved for this, which is enormously exciting, is to use the base bus building as our new EMS paramedic center. We have a desperate need for a paramedic center downtown. It makes no sense at all for everyone who needs an ambulance to have to be getting one from North York. We again, the tremendous density of people downtown and the really significant congestion, we need to have a paramedic center downtown. We haven't had a place to put one. So the bus bays actually can be repurposed really well for the paramedic center, which they badly need. The space above it is going to provide very important support for organ repair, preparation for transplant, which the University Hospital Network needs and doesn't have. And above that, we're going to have rental housing with a very significant proportion of affordable rental, all of which we need. I mean, one of the real problems we have in Hospital Row and the medical research center around it is we can hire young doctors, we can hire young nurses and respiratory technicians and all those wonderful folks, but we can't keep them because they can't afford to live here. So we have to have more affordable housing close to where they work so we can keep the fabulous people we train who we need for our future. And it's going to be an environmentally responsible building.
Fantastic. Sounds exciting. Let me ask you a couple of questions about some of the topics that you've addressed, if I could. So environmental. And obviously that's something that you've been passionate about your whole career. Some people think that if not the whole world is addressing climate change and environmental problems, it's almost not worth doing anything because coal plants in China or India are gonna negate any benefits that we have. Certainly in the last federal election, two parties decided to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. How can the city of Toronto positively influence climate when Canada and the world appear to be doing the opposite things?
Well, people who say that are not paying attention, with all due respect, Brian. If you look at what's happening in China, they were expected to reach peak coal sometime in the 2030s or later, 2040. They're probably there now. They are the world's largest builders and users of renewable energy. They have more electric cars and buses than anywhere else in the world. I mean, any one city has 6,000 electric buses. The city of Toronto has a couple of hundred, and we're the biggest in Canada. China figured out, at least a decade ago, that they can win the 21st century by being the electric leaders and leaving the oil-dependent countries behind. And that's exactly what they're doing. India as well. it realized, again, I heard this at the Paris Climate Convention when I was there as commissioner 10 years ago. They realized that they don't have a long-term supply of domestic coal, but they have an eternity's supply of really good sunlight. So again, their competitive advantage is served by moving as quickly as possible to solar, because they can be the king of solar. So countries aren't taking climate action because we're going to all hold hands and do things together. Countries are doing it because it's better for them. They're going to make more money, have more power, be less dependent. And also people do it for air quality, which is one of the world's biggest killers. Is one of the advantages here. Nobody can do it alone. Everybody needs to do something that makes sense for them. And in a very, very dense, rapidly growing city like Toronto, under this incredible population pressure, we don't have room, for example, for all the cars. If everybody gets a car and the cars keep getting bigger and bigger, we're just talking about an entire sea of gridlock, and we're having a lot of that already.
So what have environmentalists done wrong, or people that are worried about climate change, or the Green Party? If the Green Party vote goes down, they only elect one member, and both the Liberals and the Conservatives argue that we got to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. Like, what have you and other people like you done wrong if the public appears to be going the opposite direction?
There isn't a magic answer. If there was a magic answer, I think we would have done it already. I do think that Naomi Oreskes is basically right with her book, The Merchants of Doubt, that the petroleum industry is the most wealthy industry in human history. And they have used that money very, very effectively to poison the public discourse. They took the tobacco company's playbook and ramped it up on steroids, and they've used it very effectively over 30 years to delude, deceive, delay, and nobody else has that kind of money. So that, I think, is what we're up against, and we're still up against it. But at the very same time, even in the middle of that onslaught of billions, look at the amount of money that the Koch brothers put into making Trump president. But nevertheless, solar is now the cheapest way of making electricity in most of the world, and therefore it's taking off. I mean, even the Kentucky Coal Museum put solar panels on the roof because it's cheaper. And ultimately, a lot of that is occurring. Some of it, for sure, is the $50 billion that China put in to take over the world solar industry. Some of that is because of the earlier investments by Germany and the United States. Some of that is by bright people all around the world doing this and that. But a lot of things are getting better. Solar continues to decline in price at an extraordinary rate that prediction after prediction after prediction missed. And batteries are getting cheaper even faster than solar did, and even faster than wind did. So we are moving into a world where the cheapest options will be better, and money talks.
I drove in an electrical car in a Uber just on the weekend, and he was telling me that his average daily use of gas when he had a gas car was $100, and his electrical bill on a daily basis to run his electric car was $6. And he says just pure economics makes a lot more sense for him to own an electric car. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with our guest tonight, Councillor Dianne Saxe, councillor from Ward 11, University of Rosedale in the city of Toronto, talking about what she's doing on city council. Is she having an impact? What are the big issues? Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. It's a real pleasure of mine to have Dianne Saxe, Councillor Dianne Saxe, who's the councillor for Ward 11 on the City of Toronto Council. She's the councillor for University of Rosedale. She's got a really impressive background, lawyer, environmentalist. She was Ontario's environmental commissioner. She ran for the Green Party. I had the pleasure of interviewing her at the time, and she's now a city councillor. Can we turn to housing? Because I think that's one of the big issues in Toronto right now, probably, frankly, in Canada right now. Affordability, and Mayor Chow has made numerous different recommendations, but Toronto seems to be trailing Mississauga, Vaughan in reducing development fees and maybe reducing some of the red tape. What do you think about your current strategies on Toronto City Council in regarding to addressing the housing affordability issue?
Developers are always demanding that the city provide services to them for free. They don't want to pay for the sewers that serve their buildings. They don't want to pay for the libraries that serve those people. They don't want to pay for the roads and bridges. They don't want to pay. They just want to take the profits and not pay for the services their buildings need. We can't build and fix sewers and water pipes and roads and bridges and everything else that people need in the city for free. We already get only 9 cents of every tax dollar. 47 cents goes to the federal government. 44 cents goes to the provincial government, which is wasting billions and billions of dollars on a stupid highway. We can't provide infrastructure, accommodate the 240,000 people came to Toronto last year. We can't accommodate those people with the development charges. The development charges are there for a reason. But what we are doing, we've red tape to one person is protection to another person. We have already cut the amount of time that goes into an approval from years to weeks. This causes enormous anguish to people in existing communities who find their communities changing in ways that they didn't agree to, don't support, but which we don't have any choice anymore because of the way the planning framework has been truncated and the Ontario Land Tribunal has been stuck with pro-development people, and the city's ability to provide better quality development keeps being stripped away, and the province keeps, making it worse. So we've got, but we are working very, very hard to make it cheaper and faster, because that's the one thing that we've heard from the development industry for years and years, that the length of time it took to take approvals was the biggest problem they had.
Well, Stats Canada and the Build and CMHC did an analysis that said that Canada was the worst country in the G7 for approvals of development, and Toronto, Victoria, Vancouver were the 3 worst cities in Canada.
Yeah, but that's out of
for development.
Right? With the changes we're talking about have happened mostly within the last year.
So it's getting better.
It's got enormously better. It's got dizzyingly better. Talk to my residents who are absolutely furious at how fast things move before they even get their heads around things they're approved. So we have made that enormously faster. We've got 4plexes as of right across the entire city. We're discussing next week whether to make that 6plexes. We allowed, the very first thing we did, the very first council meeting, was we allowed rooming houses right across the city, which is something that had been blocked for 30 years. We have turned ourselves inside out to make it easier and faster. We've made a lot of public land available for development. We've reached into our really straightened pockets to provide subsidies for the building of rental and even a few condos. So we are doing an enormous amount. And frankly, we would do a lot more if the federal and provincial governments would come to the table and do their job. The reason affordable housing construction stopped in this country was that the federal and provincial governments basically in the 1980s stopped funding it. We can't do it ourselves.
So during the last provincial election, one of the party leaders said that development fees are paid by rich developers. And the other party leader said that's absurd. All that development fees are passed on to the consumer. And so therefore it's young people and renters that want to become homeowners that are paying for development fees. And all you're doing is increasing the cost of homes. What do you think? Are development fees it sounds like you think the way you said it, that developers always want to get things for free. It sounds like you think developers pay the development fees while the premier thinks that they get passed on to the consumers and therefore make housing less affordable. What do you think the reality is?
Well, developers only build if they can make a lot of money. The target I hear is usually 13, 14, 15%. And they don't really care that much what the costs are because they add their 15% on top. It is true that the buyers ultimately pay both all the costs right? The development charges, the land charges, the professional fees, the construction fees, the developer's profit, they pay all of that. But the development fees go to build infrastructure. That's all they're used for. You may remember the premier is always good with a quip, but not with following up. And he said, oh, yeah, the city's wasting all that money. They don't need it. And he sent in an audit team to check all our books, promising to make us whole 100 cents on the dollar if he found that things were kosher. They were kosher. He canceled the audit and he's given us 0 cents. So his argument about the money being wasted was entirely false. He knows it was entirely false. He's never retracted it. He's never paid the money he's taken from us. And now we're in an incredible hole, unable to build or fix infrastructure.
You said earlier, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not sure if I got your quote exactly right, but you said that the province makes it very difficult to get things done. Why?
I mean, why do they do it? I can't tell you why they do it. You'd have to ask him.
Okay,
but
how?
Well, for cutting our development charges by hundreds of millions of dollars a year so that we can't build the stuff we need. That's the biggest single example. But similarly, so we have enormous problems already. So the Ontario Land Tribunal has forced very, very high towers along Yonge Street. We already have a wind tunnel effect there so strong that older people get just about blown off our feet. There's more and more proposals along that same strip. So Bill 17, one of the things Ford is proposing is that we can't even get wind studies anymore. So we won't even know whether new buildings are adequately designed so that they won't blow people off their feet. He's proposing to prevent us from getting information about wind, getting information about shadow, getting information about urban design. How can we make good decisions if we can't get the data that makes a good building or a bad building?
So the counter to that is there's something like 28 reports that are typically needed to submit for a zoning application, and that's ballooned over the course of the last couple of decades. That it has, and maybe it's improved of late, 2 to 3 times as long to get development approved as it does actually build it, and that cost has made it impractical to build, such that right now people are calling it a freeze in the condo market, and you can't get a condo built.
Well, it doesn't make sense to build a condo now, but that's not because of us. That's because of interest rates and because most of the condos were being built for investors who thought they were going to have a big pot of free money. When interest rates were almost zero, you could put down a deposit, sit and wait for the building to be built, rent it out, get more than enough money from the rent to pay all your carrying costs, and have free money. And that stopped being the case as soon as interest rates went up.
I drove on East Hastings in Vancouver last week.
Sorry, I'm going to stop and close the door because somebody's making noise. Hold on.
And on East Hastings, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of homeless people. And I was actually in a cab with a local politician who said, watch out, because if you don't change things in Toronto soon, you're going to be just like us in Vancouver, and you're going to have, homeless like crazy. We've got a homeless problem, but thankfully it's not anywhere like what you see in Victoria or Vancouver. What do you think we need to do to address homelessness in Toronto?
Well, again, the primary issue is the province. The province keeps people who are on disability or on Ontario Works in deep generational poverty, where they, $700 a month. You can't rent anywhere to live. Refugees that the province is required by law to support, they get $700. They can't afford to move out of our shelters. So the first thing is the province needs to increase minimum wage, dramatically increase Ontario Works and disability payments so that people actually can afford to pay rent. That'll be the first thing. The second thing is there's the Canada-Ontario housing benefit, again, to support very low-income people so they can afford to pay rent. They keep it so low that most families are just left on the waiting list. They need to fix that. We have a huge problem with untreated mental illness and addictions, and that's a pure provincial responsibility the province is not addressing. The data that we get suggests that at least 2/3 of the people on the street are mentally ill or addicted or both. They are entitled to health care but don't get it. So those are all provincial problems that they don't deal with and they dump on us. Then we have, in addition, a really challenging problem, which is that because we provide so much more in services and supports for the homeless in Toronto than any of our neighboring municipalities, 10 times as much as Brampton, for example, people come to us. And then they come to us from all over because we provide services. And so this is a never-ending treadmill that we're on. And we have an equally challenging problem with refugee claimants. The number of refugee claimants in our shelter system has more than doubled every year since 2021. This is absolutely a federal government problem. They used to require proof at the border and somebody was coming in that either they had a legitimate refugee claim or that they had some means of support. They've abandoned that completely. And so these thousands and thousands of refugee claimants with no resources flood in and are dumped on the city. I mean, we really are at the butt end of the failures of the federal and provincial governments, and they just wipe their hands on them and leave them on our streets.
So there's a book that you may have heard of in the United States called Abundance that's created a sort of a trend that they call the abundance movement that suggests that just building housing, particularly social housing, is the biggest problem. That if people have got a place to live, a lot of the things that you've talked about are alleviated: drugs and mental health issues and a lot of other problems. And that, they suggest, is the biggest problem, is we just got to do a better job of providing housing. What do you think to that?
So it's partly true. And again, as I said, the federal and provincial governments built an enormous amount of housing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They did it to deal with the soldiers returning from the war and so on and so forth. And so we had a good supply of affordable housing because they built it. And when, with the tax cutting, the Reagan-Thatcher tax cutting, the federal and provincial government stopped having the money to run those kinds of programs, they just canceled them. And they told us, oh, don't worry, the private sector will deal with it. Well, the private sector didn't deal with it, can't deal with it, won't deal with it because it's not profitable to build low-income housing. They have to get back in the business of paying for it if they want it to exist. The second thing is that it is true that for many people, housing is the answer. But we also know that there's a significant number of people on the streets, whether because they've suffered brain damage from repeated overdoses or otherwise, who we have tried to place into housing and are so incredibly destructive and disruptive that they destroy the living environment for everybody else in the building. And this has been, it was forced down the throat of the Toronto Community Housing Corporation. And the city has finally, the mayor, I don't know who, has finally realized that this is poisonous. They can't do it. They can't just take people and assume that if they're in housing, they're going to be okay, because very often it's not true. For some people it is, but for people with serious addictions and brain damage, very often it's not. We cannot just put them into housing. They need much more expensive and specialized supports. And that, again, is the responsibility of the province.
You said that Brampton provides 1/10 the support for disadvantaged people and homeless people as Toronto. Is that true?
But I've been told, per capita.
Like, that's just terrible. There should be some sort of, otherwise it's going to be this huge disincentive to stay in Brampton or incentive to go to Toronto. There's got to be some sort of equalization, doesn't there?
Well, again, I mean, the provincial government was doing their job. We wouldn't have this problem. But yes, it means we're flooded. And if we could house every single person who's on our streets today, it wouldn't help because we're constantly getting more.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Dianne Saxe, the ward councillor for Ward 11, University of Rosedale. Stay with us, everyone. This is a great conversation about a bunch of the issues facing Toronto. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Very excited to have Councillor Dianne Saxe with us tonight. She's the councillor for Ward 11, University of Rosedale on Toronto City Council. Councillor Saxe, I understand that you had something to do with a new theater. What's this all about? Tell us.
Oh, it's very exciting. So we have a new building, supportive housing, 877 Yonge. It used to be a seniors building that the city bought with CMHC funding. And it had a great big empty sub basement that was, just run down and tired and moldy and awful. But at the very same time, there were two amazing local theater companies, the Nightwood Theater, I think Canada's top feminist theater company that deals with Canadian productions, and Tapestry Opera. And they were partners for 20 years in a theater in the Distillery District. And in 2022, they were evicted. And not just them, but all the other 50 or so theater and performance groups that used to use their space. They were just thrown on the street with nowhere to go. So they were desperately looking for a new space, and you know how tough it was for theaters during COVID, so they didn't have a lot of money, but they managed to make a link with Andrea Adams, the head of St. Clair's Multi-Faith, who for the city operates this supportive housing at 877 Yonge, which is right next to the Rosedale subway station, just south of there. And Andrea had the brilliant insight that in an established middle and upper class community, bringing in supportive housing can make the neighbors distrustful and uncomfortable and fearful, but you could maybe change that if you also made that a cultural center, providing something of value to the community around. So she made a deal to help the two theater companies rent this sub basement that was otherwise just sitting there empty, growing mold, under the supportive housing building. And just when I got elected, just when they were starting to try to come up with some idea how to fund even repairing it enough that, not that they could have a theater there, but at least so they could have an office and a rehearsal space. And I thought it was an amazing idea. At first, it wasn't clear to me that I could do anything about it. Eventually, I did find a way to do something about it. And in the end, I went right down the rabbit hole. I ended up going to council 4 times, providing nearly half of their funding, introducing them to other community groups that provided funding. And when all was said and done, and disasters with, a flood in the a leak in the foundations. Anyway, we got it all fixed. And the very first production opened, Sanctuary Song, in May, was a tremendous success. And the Nightwood Theatre will be there for the first time in September. It's now a beautiful, fully fitted out, smaller theater, about 120 seats. It's got a good, totally functional green room. It's completely accessible. It's got accessible bathrooms. It's made a rundown, ugly, frightening section of Yonge Street into a new cultural center. And it's so exciting.
Excellent. Congratulations for your assistance in that.
And to make it happen in 2 years, that never happens in the city of Toronto.
I understand that you're chair of the audit committee for the TTC.
I am, Audit and Risk Management Committee. I sort of volunteered for that. And it's been a tremendous opportunity. So 2 of the things that I have really pushed very, very hard, they're both relate to having reliable service. I agree with our new CEO that making the TTC more reliable is one of the most important things we can do. And so we used to have a pretty good fare collection system, and it started to disintegrate by 2019. We were at 6% fare evasion, and then through COVID, it collapsed. And so we were at 12, 13% fare evasion and rising, because people see somebody else not paying, well, they're less likely to pay themselves. And that was leading to all kinds of problems, including the delays. I mean, it drives people crazy when the subway is delayed, and 2/3 of those delays are disorderly patrons, and which turns out to usually mean people who didn't pay.
2/3 of the delays are just because of disorderly patrons.
Well, disorderly persons, they're not patrons. They're usually people who didn't pay. They snuck in or they cheated in or some way or other. And, a lot of the mentally ill and the addicted go into the subway and they start screaming. They tear off their clothes. They pull the alarms. They harass people. I mean, whatever. Some of them don't, but some do. And that causes 2/3 of the delays in the subway. So the TTC didn't have any realistic plan. They had all kinds of excuses, but they had no realistic plan for doing anything about it. So getting serious about fare enforcement was the first thing I really tackled from a substantive point of view. And I will say that it is being, we're making really good progress. Fare evasion on the streetcars is already down by a third. The crash gates in the subway stations were nearly half of the people using them were cheating. The crash gates are all now closed. We have the fare collectors who used to sit in their little booth and not talking to people are now out. They're customer service agents. We have much more fare checking. We just finally started fare checking on the buses. The people riding the buses for the last several years knew their fare was never going to be checked, and they cheated and cheated and cheated. That's come to an end. So we are making progress, and that is also helping reducing the disruption on the subway. The second thing is bunching and gapping. That's not a subway issue. That's a bus and streetcar issue. Some of that is congestion, and I've dealt with that in several ways, including turn restrictions and parking restrictions on Dundas. And now we're going to be putting in a streetcar lane on Bathurst so the Bathurst streetcar can get through, but also just better management by the TTC of the bunching and gapping. And there again, the cost for this relentless starvation of the city under John Tory and Ford before him led the TTC to lose or let go a lot of their field supervisors and to centralize the rest where they couldn't see the drivers. So
hold it. Starvation of the TTC?
Yeah, I mean, there was so little money that we went long past cutting frivolous things, and they literally had to cut the number of field supervisors to keep the buses on track.
Councillor Saxe, if Osgoode Hall, where you graduated and got a Lifetime Achievement Award, or some university asked you to make the convocation address, probably you've been asked to do that, and you had to talk about your vision for Toronto. What's your vision for Toronto?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first thing is I want this to be a livable city for my children and grandchildren, not just this year, not just next year, for the decades to come in the chaos that's coming. We know that we're going to have food and water longer than most places in the world. So I think we're going to be under tremendous pressure, people wanting to come here. And we have to be a city that works with a lot more people. And that means we have to have ways to get around that dramatically turn away from so many people in private cars. We are already in gridlock because so many people try to drive wherever they want to in their private car. I understand the appeal, but we just don't have the space. And just the fact that cars are so much bigger now than they were 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, that alone has reduced the carrying capacity of our roads by, according to one study, by about 20%, which itself is enough to create congestion. Then you have Metrolinx ripping up a whole batch of our major intersections downtown, which is, as the Board of Trade recognized, the largest single cause of congestion in the city of Toronto. And we also have to be catching up on the lost decade of repairs. Again, because we didn't collect enough taxes and development charges to be able to repair our infrastructure, we're now trying to catch up. You know, the old stitch in time saves 9. If you fix a roof leak when it's little, you don't have to fix it when the whole ceiling's fallen in. Well, now we're dealing with the ceiling falling in. So we're trying to catch up with an enormous backlog of damaged and poorly maintained infrastructure. We need to do that and build the parks and the libraries and the public spaces and the services that all these new people are going to need. And we're going to have to do that under climate chaos. So be more efficient, costs have to come down. And that's where efficiency, energy efficiency pays over and over again. Because it reduces operating costs. We have to reduce our operating costs. We have to do things that are going to last longer with less imported inputs, or we're not going to be able to afford to keep the ship together.
Councillor Dianne Saxe, thank you so much for joining us. I was excited to chat with you about your candidacy for the Green Party, and I'm even more excited to see what you're doing and what you want to do on Toronto City Council. I don't agree with everything you said, but I think that you've got an incredibly progressive and challenging and interesting agenda, and all the best for you realizing your vision for Toronto. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.
We're going to take a final break, and I'm going to come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Thanks.